Hello, and welcome to Your Estate Matters with your hosts, my colleague Greg Bernand and myself, Nicole Garten of Heritage Trust.
Your Estate Matters is a podcast dedicated to everything estates, including building and preserving your legacy.
If it's estate related, we'll be talking about it. We're having the conversations today that will help Canadians protect their families, their assets, and their legacies tomorrow. So, Geoff, thank you so much for being here today to talk to us about digital asset planning.
It's great to be here. I'm really excited, Nicole.
So do you want to tell us what are digital assets?
Sure. So digital assets are a very broad spectrum of different things that people acquire over their life. They can be photographs, they can be emails, they can be documents, they can be anything that is fundamentally stored in a digital manner. And so some of them have monetary value that's immediately apparent, and some of them don't. So things like photo albums that are stored on your Google Drive or on the Apple photo book, that obviously has sentimental value, and you want to know how, if you passed away, that your loved ones would be able to access photos and do that sort of things. But they don't necessarily have monetary value. There's also digital assets, and this is kind of the space that I fundamentally work in, that have value in and of themselves. So things like Bitcoin, Ethereum, NFTs, stablecoins, these are fundamentally digital assets, but they also have monetary value. And so they're relevant when you're doing estate planning, when you're doing kind of family planning, to be considering how will my loved ones get a hold of these if I happen to pass away.
What is cryptocurrency specifically?
Sure. So cryptocurrency is really a whole array of different types of things. There's lots of different cryptocurrencies, but the commonality between them is that they are data that is stored on a decentralized ledger, which is usually a blockchain. So the best example that I always give is, if I want to know how much money is in my Scotiabank account, I go to Scotiabank's website, or I go on my app, and it pulls up a number for me. And that number is being pulled from a Scotiabank database. It's being pulled from an Excel grid that Scotiabank owns and controls and gets to change whenever they want. Cryptocurrencies are actually almost identical to this, except that the database or the Excel grid that you're pulling the information from is decentralized. So no one party has the authority to edit it or manipulate it or change it at whim. It's secured by cryptography, and there's lots of different types of cryptography that gets used, and there's some game theory and a bunch of complicated math behind the scenes. But fundamentally, it means that these are assets that are secured by a ledger that no party or government or organization has control of. I can control my wallet and what happens in it, but I can't control what happens anywhere else, and neither can any other third party.
So you mentioned a word, cryptography. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means?
Sure. So cryptography has been around for a very, very long time, and it goes back to just passing, hidden messages in bottles or by couriers and kind of pigeons in Game of Thrones. They would all use different types of cryptography. Nowadays, it's a lot more computer oriented. And if you've seen kind of the Alan Turing movie, about kind of the invention of the computer and why it was invented to partially help break codes. And cryptography is really powerful in our daily life, even when we don't notice it. So again, when you log on to Scotiabank, you're using kind of what's called an HTTPS system, which end-to-end secures kind of the information going back and forth, which means if I'm some third party that intercepts the messages going between, Nicole and Scotiabank, I can't actually read them. They just come out as gibberish to me, and only you and the bank have the keys to read that information and decipher it. So there's lots and lots of different types. There's different types that kind of require more computer power, less computing power. But cryptocurrencies are based off this idea that there's ways to kind of encrypt keys to do certain things on a decentralized ledger, and to edit that ledger and to run smart contracts and do sorts of things that allow people to control their assets or finances in ways that they weren't previously able to do.
So something we hear a lot is it's mining. What does that mean exactly?
Sure. So mining is a large topic. So cryptography is not the only thing that makes blockchains tick. One of the things, there's a lot of game theory, which is a fancy word for aligning a bunch of incentives from different people to achieve some outcome that you want. So one of the ways that Bitcoin originally, and this was what the inventor of Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto, really kind of caught onto and invented, was this idea of proof of work. And so in order to you'll hear people doing Bitcoin mining, and what they're doing is they're basically solving very, very complicated but useless math equations. So they have very powerful computers so they can generate lots and lots of solutions to this. And every time they are creating a solution, they're guessing and checking against one. The only way that they can create a new block in the blockchain is by correctly solving the problem. And the only way they can solve the problem is by guessing and checking thousands of times a second. By creating this work, by having to use this computing power, they mean that anybody who wants to do something nefarious on the blockchain also has to do that much work and that much computing power. And so there's an incentive there where a bad actor needs to outperform every other good actor in the system. So if you have 1 million people all using computers to secure this network, and only one person who wants to be a bad actor, their computer has to be more powerful than every other person's combined. And that creates this kind of security, trade-off that allows the network itself and the ledger to remain secure, because who wins and who solves the math problem every 10 minutes is a mystery. In Bitcoin, and this is a thing that will come up in kind of estate planning, the person who solves one of those problems and gets to create a new block on a blockchain is rewarded with some new cryptocurrency, so some new Bitcoin in the case of the Bitcoin blockchain. And so there are businesses and people who did a lot of Bitcoin mining, in the early 2000s, if they were lucky. And that whole system is designed to kind of incentivize people to mine, to add their computing power to the network, which increases the security of how everybody uses it.
What have some recent challenges around digital assets in estate administration?
The biggest problem that comes up in estate administration is honestly simply being organized and finding assets, because a lot of times, this was a very new thing, and maybe you were embarrassed that you owned a bunch of pictures of monkeys or something like that ended up being worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. So you didn't tell, your spouse or your kids, whoever it was, how to access these things or where to go or what to do. And so a lot of times what I've seen in estates is you have one partner who's very savvy on this stuff and one partner who is completely ignorant. And as I mentioned earlier, because there's no single entity that controls these blockchains, when a person passes away, there's no one that a spouse can phone to say, help me do this, help me to figure out how to get these assets out, what's the key, all of that stuff. So there's a lot of the issues that come up around cryptocurrency and estate planning are around the planning mechanism and making sure that we're leaving a detailed instructions to our loved ones on where things are, where we can find them, etc. There are kind of quality. There's been, since probably 2019, pre-2019, there was a lot of kind of different exchanges and different custodians who were really not very well regulated. A lot of them have now gone bankrupt, disappeared from the market, and are being replaced with a lot more reputable companies that can help you do custodianships as well. So a lot of times it's talking about, with somebody who's thinking about planning, is it better for me to hold these assets in a private wallet that nobody else can access and only I have the keys to? Or is it better to engage some sort of third-party custodian who are a lot more responsive to court orders, or they have an understanding of the succession plan, et cetera?
Okay, what is the existing legal landscape around these assets?
Great question. So the legal landscape is both kind of not as complicated as people would think, but also very much in flux. So when it comes to large questions like, are cryptocurrencies a security that should be registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission in the US or the equivalent in Canada? There are lots and lots of questions that remain. It's a really complicated question. It's not as simple as saying all of them are, all of them aren't. There's probably some that are. There's probably a lot more that aren't that people think, because the test is very, very old. There, in the space that I work, that's a super exciting question, but it's a very technical legal one that's probably not the place here. When it comes to estate planning and family planning and kind of family inheritance, there actually isn't a lot of really, new, uncertain legal things. Cryptocurrency, whether they're NFTs or certain types of Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple, whatever people have, they're assets. They fall under the estate. They have to get passed off to succession. They have to fall through the probate process. You have to pay taxes on them if there's tax in your jurisdiction on the estate administration. There isn't a huge amount of uncertain questions. Having said that, there can be some technical difficulties around things like valuation, around finding quality accountants who can provide you with, what the data is on doing a sale. If you're selling the assets, if somebody who's deceased and they were selling the assets on a decentralized platform that doesn't provide like a nice ledger and receipts and all that stuff, doing that kind of forensic work can be quite complicated and unfamiliar to the accountants who are used to what they're used to.
So, given the complexity and the fact that the legal landscape is so in flux, do you have recommendations to people if they do have crypto or NFTs? We haven't even talked about those. Maybe we can chat about that. But what are some practices that they could use that if they became suddenly incapable or passed away, that their family would have access?
So there are, like I said, the way I do it is I break it down into two different worlds. So one is the fully on-chain world, and one is the off kind of more traditional way, the way to hold crypto in a more traditional capacity. So if you're looking at the on-chain world, so you're living in the world of, I need to have a private key for my wallet and I'm the only one who can access it, and there's no way to get help, so to speak, if something happens to me. There are a bunch of kind of some more advanced planning techniques. I think it's called multi-signature wallets, where a wallet can have multiple people who have access to it, or you have to get a signature from 3 out of 5 different holders. And that's a useful planning tool for people who want to make sure that they're retaining custody of their assets in a kind of self-custody manner. Then, like I mentioned earlier, there are kind of the more traditional ways to hold, or they're not more traditional because they're actually newer, but they feel like the more traditional ways to hold these assets. So they're maybe like holding them within Coinbase, which is really an equivalent to kind of a Questrade or a self-trading platform that you'd be used to with stocks. In that case, Coinbase has the access to the private keys, and they're the ones who you'd have to deal with to get it released. But at least there's somebody who can phone. There's also new ETFs that are emerging. So maybe you want exposure to Bitcoin, but you don't actually want to worry about doing what happens if I die and pass away. You can go and buy a variety of different kind of ETFs, which are fully traditional. They even fit inside your TFSA or RRSP, and maybe that provides a different kind of succession planning solution. Maybe I've even heard talk of people who going on a trip, or I'm going under surgery, and so they move their value into one of these assets for that brief period of time, then they sell that and go back to their kind of self-custody manner. And that really gives them some more certainty that if something happened to me, then the value isn't lost. And it is important to stress with these kind of clients that is the consequence. There is nobody who can phone. There is no judge who can kind of will a transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain to bring the Bitcoin to a new address. There's nobody to provide that support. So if it's not done up front, you really are kind of exposing yourself to that tail risk.
So where do you see this in 5-10 years? It's moving so quickly.
So I think that things are moving super quickly. There are becoming more and more applications that are becoming more user-friendly for people to do this type of planning. There's going to become increasing kind of familiarity in the legal and accounting and professional services around how these things work, how to value them, how to read the ledgers and the different transactions that have gone through to pay taxes on them accurately. There are going to be third-party services that help you do those things, right? So maybe you don't hire a business valuator, but there's different websites that'll help look through your whole history and tell you what your capital gains are likely to be. So really what's exciting for me is I'm working in an industry that is changing on a weekly, monthly basis, and new kind of startups and ideas are coming up all the time to make this easier. And ultimately the people in this space really want to build a financial system and a way for people to hold value that is less dependent on governments and less dependent on banks, which are often frustrating in terms of how they deal with clients. One of the things that I see all the time is sending wire transfers or sending kind of large amounts of money, and you have kind of a middle manager at a bank who you spend 4 weeks with going back and forth on a letter to move $100,000 to a child or a family member. In crypto, and I can tell you this from what I've seen, we are moving millions of dollars a day for 10 cents, across borders without, in a fully legal manner, without having to deal with a lot of that friction. So there is a real upside for people on the other side of this, is that they may interact with financial institutions that don't even know they're using crypto, but kind of behind the scenes, there's that kind of that those are the mechanisms we're doing to keep track of counting the beans as they move through the system.
Nicole was speaking about maybe expanding the idea here. We've talked about currency, but maybe to NFTs, or we were at a conference where they spoke about continuing your characters on in the metaverse,
Sure,
and leaving money for that. So that was kind of interesting. If you
sure.
wanted to briefly
So
talk about
NFTs, they were a big thing in kind of 2021, and they are really exciting. But really, NFTs are exactly the same as cryptocurrency. The NFT stands for a non-fungible token. So a Bitcoin is a Bitcoin is a Bitcoin. An NFT is a little different. It includes a bunch of data that's unique to it. So it's kind of like having a piece of art or a collector's card or something. It has provenance potentially, but it can have a lot of different features. So it could be a picture. Sometimes the picture is stored directly on the chain. In a lot of cases, it's actually stored on some website and it's just a link that's stored on the chain. But it could also be things like tickets to movies, tickets to concerts, right? Every concert has a unique data, seat, everything like that. And you look at kind of, can we create markets around tickets that are not owned by Ticketmaster? They are simply allowed people to move tickets around securely between themselves in their own kind of decentralized marketplace. And that is better for users at the end of the day and is a really exciting kind of feature. So NFTs, just like any other cryptocurrency, they need the same kind of thought process and kind of attention to detail on the planning. One of the things that is funny about kind of planning in this area or talking to clients is people will say, oh, I don't have to worry about this NFT or this thing. It's only worth $50. If I lose it, then it's not the end of the world. It may be worth $50 today. It may be worth a lot at the end, in 5 years. On the flip side, sometimes people have a lot, a huge value in NFTs, and then they become worth nothing, which sounds silly, but those are capital losses, right? So even on the situation where somebody is dealing with cryptocurrency that's gone down dramatically in price, those are capital losses that can offset other aspects of their estate or their personal taxes. That has value, and being able to kind of advise clients on that and say, even if it's gone down $100,000, you may feel foolish, but let's find ways that we can kind of optimize your taxes is a good add-on.
So you're a wealth of information and expertise. How can people find you?
So I'm kind of excited to, have in my own small law firm called Immutable Law Corporation, immutablelaw.ca. And I work with clients in BC, it's a small side practice for me. I work with other lawyers to help them on files that maybe involve cryptocurrency, to come in and kind of coach them or deal with the specific legal issues that arise around cryptocurrency. And then individuals who need help around planning or need help kind of around legal. I'm kind of trying to quarterback legal issues around cryptocurrency in general. And usually the way that works is, again, I kind of run in the sidecar with them and their actual lawyer, just to kind of provide the very narrow kind of crypto advice when it's needed. But I'm not a family lawyer, for example. I don't do divorces. But I'm more than happy to kind of work with that lawyer on those specific issues and make sure that they get handled properly. And again, right now, I think there's a huge opportunity for lawyers who want to carve out a space for themselves, like myself. Like, this is a total unknown. It doesn't take years and years to kind of get comfortable with it, and then you can provide a lot of value to clients and to other lawyers and to the court system generally if you have an understanding of these new technologies.
Well, amazing. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. It was great.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered individual legal, financial, or tax advice. Make sure to consult the advisor of your choice to advise you on your own circumstances. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Your Estate Matters. If you like this podcast, make sure to follow it on your podcast platform of choice.
Whether you are planning your own estate or you're acting as executor for somebody else's, Heritage Trust can help. Partner with Heritage Trust to protect your family, your assets, and your legacy.
If you would like more information about Heritage Trust, please visit our website at heritagetrustcompany.ca.
This podcast is produced by Podfather Creative.